Welcome, everyone, to Gallup, and thank you for being here today as we launch the 2025 World Happiness Report. Now, before I share with you the top 10 rankings, I want to do just a quick history of how we got here, because there were 4 pivotal moments that inspired this particular work and helped get this work done. So the first of those pivotal moments was in 1934, when Simon Kuznets went to the American Congress and he recommended that we have a new measure to understand how the economy is going. But that moment, which created the official statistics for the economy, GDP, inspired all of us. Because what it meant is now we could think about what would it look like to create statistics for every single country in the world and to understand how do we measure whether or not societies are progressing or not. After that, fast forward about 70 years later, there was another man, and he said, everything that we know about economics, I'm not sure is entirely right. And that person, who was a member of the Gallup tribe, a senior scientist, was Danny Kahneman. In 2002, he was the first psychologist to win the Nobel in economics for the very reason that he said, this thing that underpins economics, where we say, is it really that people are rational, or is it that people are emotional? That shattered our conventional wisdom of what it meant for economics. Then there was another moment after Danny Kahneman won the Nobel in 2002 for that very moment, which happened right here at Gallup, because our chairman, Jon Clifton, said, what if we actually go build those official statistics for the world to understand the emotional side? What if we went and actually just built the statistics to understand what it means to make a great life? And at that moment, our chairman recruited a number of scholars around the world and said, help us in this pursuit to build this. And I want to read a quote, because at that very moment, there's a video of the late Danny Kahneman, and this is what he said about what it looked like when this initiative was born. And he said, when Jim made the decision to create the whirlpool, and I can tell you, I thought it was crazy. Here he was, moving into something that is a huge undertaking. He was making commitments, talking of 100 years. He thought he was sort of betting the company, and he did not have a clear business plan that I could see, but he just wanted it done. And he managed to energize the people around him, and he got that done in a record time, and it's working. I think this is the most interesting part, because then Danny Kahneman goes on to say, and it's changed the face of well-being research, and I sometimes compare it to Galileo's telescope, because it provides a way of looking at well-being that was just not available to us earlier. And at that moment, the whirlpool was born, and we started building the world's official statistics for what it meant to be a great life. And then there was a fourth key moment that helped bring all this information to life, which was Jeff Sachs reached out and said, is it okay if we use that telescope? And he started recruiting others to join him. In fact, Jan Emanuel Deneve is here today as well. And we started to partner with that group of academics to say, let's start to understand what is it that drives these particular data. So before I show you the results, those are the 4 key moments inspired by Simon Kuznets that building world statistics is something that's possible. When Danny Kahneman said, well, let's just make sure that all the statistics aren't just rational, that we're also capturing the emotional side. When our chairman, Jon Clifton, said, let's just build it, and we did. And then when Jeff Sachs said, let's partner, and let's create a report that everyone sees as soon as we get the rankings. But in order to pull this off, and I think what Danny Kahneman thought was so remarkable was this, because when we capture this information and we go out to 150 different countries, 40 of those countries we call people in their homes and have lengthy conversations with them. But in the other 100 countries, I want you to see what it looks like, because we show up to their homes. Not everyone in the world has access to a phone or to the internet. So for us to capture this information, we must sit with them and have a long conversation about their lives. In fact, this is what it looks like in Indonesia, and this is what the conversations look like in Zambia. 150,000 conversations like that take place every single year. And in this report, we've aggregated 3 years, which means we have talked to 500,000 people on the phone or exactly like this. And the stories we hear are remarkable. The question that we're launching today, as you know, is rate your life on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is the worst imaginable life and 10 is the best imaginable life. Where do you stand today? We asked a woman in Kyrgyzstan that exact question. First we said, though, where did you stand 5 years ago? She said back to us, my life is a 2. Then we said to her, how about today? And she said, my life is a 2. And we said, what do you think it'll be in the next 5 years? And she said back to us, a 10. At the end of the interview, our colleague was there. She looked at her and she said, that's a pretty big leap. What is it? Why the change? And she said, I'm pregnant. I'm going to have a son. But those are the conversations that we have had 500,000 of that speak to this report. Because just like when Simon Kuznets said, let's build the world's official statistics so that we can quantify every economic interaction in the world, we use that spirit to build the world's official statistics for every life transaction that takes place in the world. And that's what we're launching today. So, what are the results? These are the top 10 countries from the World's Happiness Report, and the happiest country in the world is Finland. Congratulations to Finland. You'll notice that there are 2 that have joined this list this year, which are Costa Rica and Mexico, and of course the ambassador from Costa Rica is here to help explain why those increases are taking place. And for many of us in here that are Americans, we'll notice that there's one country that is notably absent, which is the United States. And the United States has had some tough years when we're asking people about happiness, and the U.S. has slid all the way down to the mid-20s. And if you look on the other side of the ledger, there's a data point here that has set a new record in our near 20 years of tracking in almost 170 countries where we have asked this particular question, which is Afghanistan. That is a record low. We have never seen a society in the history of our tracking where they have rated their lives as low as Afghanistan does today. But every single year, we focus on a major subcomponent. And this year, the team went in to say, what are some aspects of life that we could see are actually creating that cause behind these happiness indicators? Now, if you look at the very top, one of the things that causes how we see our lives to decline is, of course, whether or not you have a job. Of course, that has horrible consequences for your income, how people perceive purpose, and sometimes, as we've seen with other research, being sedentary when it's involuntary can have negative consequences for a person and for society. But if you look here, because we even looked at information like whether or not your pay is doubled, but we found that one of the greatest correlates to seeing what makes life great is whether or not you live in a society that has community, and whether or not you live in a society where people feel safe. And if you see at the very bottom, one of the strongest things that we can see that would predict whether or not people rate their lives highly is whether or not if you drop a wallet in that particular society, will it get returned to you? It's a reminder that community and generosity also are a massive component about what makes life great. But there's a concern, because there are 3 variables that we look at every single year, and we ask it in every single country, because we want to know what is it that makes community great. Because when it comes to community, we're trying to understand not just do you have your basics, but we also want to understand, do people give back? Do they donate their time? Do they donate their money? And also, do they help people that they don't even know? And remarkably, before the pandemic, the entire world started to see an increase of people with this overwhelming amount of generosity. And 3 years after the pandemic, it continued. But there's a concern because most recently, when you look at this information, we see that there's been a subtle decline. So a question for us is what are the consequences now that as we look at this information and we see that there's a decline in people just helping each other or people just donating to an organization? Are there consequences that society will have when we start to pull apart as a community? Thank you all so much for being here today as we launch these results and having an interest in our work.